Welcome, everyone. We'll give it another 30 seconds as people file in from the waiting room. All right, well, let's get this show on the road. Great to see everyone. Welcome to our CCA biweekly workshop out of the Culture Center for Cultural Affairs. I'm excited about today because we have a bunch of speakers, and it's a little bit different format in that we've got sort of two separate things. We're bookending here for our topic today, but we've got Stan Renard and then a group with Antonio Cuyler, Matt Carruthers, and Jason Imbesi, who are going to be presenting on two different chapters in this book. There's the book plug. It's our Innovating Institutions and Inequities in the Arts book that came out. They each contributed a chapter very generously. If you haven't checked out the book yet, please do so. We're continuing the series of having each of the authors who've contributed a piece to this volume have a chance to share it with you or in person in a live Zoom setting. And so I'm excited to be able to be part of this. Glad you all could join us. And we're going to start off with Stan Renard is going to lead for the first piece of this and then hand it over to the second. Stan, please take it away.
Thank you, Doug. Let me share my screen real quick. And slide. Okay. Are you all able to see this? Great, super. So this is chapter 6 in the book. The role of arts incubators in addressing digital divide inequities. So I'm looking mostly at the infrastructure of the digital divide, as well as digital skill training. I want to start off by thanking the National Endowment for the Arts for supporting this research. This was conducted as part of one of the NEA research lab that we are part of, and that studies the intersection of arts, entrepreneurship, and innovation. So I think it's a fairly good fit for the talk. So I'll get started right away. The chapter, as you all may have, if you read it, you may know that it's. We all know that digital technology has a profound influence on the arts. However, what we've observed is that there are still a lot of inequities, as due to digital technologies. Not everyone has access to this. So we know that the internet is a platform for broad engagement, especially with social media, and we have access to mass communication. We are looking at digital skills that are, provided by these arts incubators. So I'll keep on going into this topic. So the impact of digital technology, they open new avenues for sharing artwork. So we can think a bit about DSPs, like digital service providers, especially for musicians, for instance. This is the platforms that they use to distribute their music across aggregators. Same goes for art makers through different e-marketplaces and a way to reach gatekeepers through those. Again, the internet is a good conduit for social interaction and cultural expression. There are some art forms that are native to digital technologies. And digital skills empower independent creators, and they give them access to the creative economy. Those who don't have access to these digital skills, have a harder time. So up to date, emerging technologies, digital technologies have profoundly impacted production distribution. So again, there's DSPs, we use e-marketplaces. And that's outside sometimes of the performing arts. Of course, there are traditional ways of distributing creative works in a physical format, but those physical formats have substitutes that are in electronic formats. And so that's that has changed the instantaneous process of distributing art forms. We see this a lot in the Creative Commons as well for non-commercial creators, folks who release their content on podcasts or may release their content on other digital platforms. All right, so I'm going to go into the core of the research. We studied 14 arts incubators. Those are part of a larger network of 380 plus arts incubators across the United States. Those arts incubators, they're very much an alternative for artists who perhaps don't have access to or the ability to perhaps pursue higher education or go to college. And so this is, they provide, usually very tailored programs to certain art forms, sometimes to multiple art forms. So they provide training. The training it's very unique. None of these arts incubators are duplications of one on another. They provide mentorship, networking, sometimes facilities. Sometimes they don't have facilities. They're fully online native. And they may provide some services such as legal or tax services to the artists that they serve. They also provide funding sometimes and fiscal sponsorship in some instances. We can think about Intersection for the Arts in San Francisco is an example of an arts organization that provides fiscal sponsorship to probably over 100 other arts organizations that don't want to necessarily deal with payroll issues and so forth. Again, the programs are tailored in digital skills. So the programs I'm looking at arts incubators that provide entrepreneurial training to artists, not just on arts incubators that incubate, train folks to do better art. It's mostly entrepreneurial training for artists. And so, again, very unique programs. The location of the arts incubators, we can kind of see in this picture, it's a little bit blurry, but it's fairly widespread in the US. Again, these are like the 380 plus, so you can see the clusters where they are. Not as many in rural markets, but some arts incubators specialize in rural markets. You can think about the First People's Fund, for instance, in Rapid City, South Dakota. They have a very unique program that pairs artists across the nation. They serve mostly members of tribal nations and Native Hawaiians. And when folks are from all over the country and they pair each artist with two professionals, one may be a business professional and one an artist within the field that artist is in. So they provide both the art coaching and the business coaching. So I want to go back into this. So the locations of these arts incubators, that's important because a lot of the time arts incubators are location specific. So they may look only at the one census tract, one city, perhaps several communities. Sometimes they're nationwide. And they are from dependent centers. So they may specialize in catering to artists, perhaps musicians or visual artists, or perhaps they it can be video game makers, it can be filmmakers and so forth. So, and sometimes they have multiple outfits that they serve. Some provide a physical space, others don't. Those who provide a physical space tend to, help out a little bit more in terms of digital divide issues, and we'll get into that in a minute. And those who are fully provide an online service usually provide some educational programming that usually is open access to the artists that they serve, and usually some funding. So that's usually the models of online programming. keep going. All right, so in terms of digital divide and definition of digital divide, 1.0 will be the infrastructure. So if folks don't have access to an internet connection, a reliable internet connection, maybe the upstream, the downstream aspect of the connection is just not reliable. Even major cities across the United States don't have like great internet. We look at San Antonio, for instance, 7th largest city in the US. I see that my internet is unstable. I hope you can still hear me. And so San Antonio, for instance, has one of the worst internet connectivity in the nation. And so that's affecting their arts incubator. Digital divide 2.0, that's the access to information. So knowing, especially we live in a day and age of clutter on the internet, disinformation, not knowing what content is legitimate, what content is not. And so that's very much like the know-how and what information to find, what is reliable and what is not. So I did a study of broadband capacities in different cities, and usually the communities that were served by the 14 arts incubators that we studied in with more focus. And so we're looking at upstream, that's when you upload content, and downstream when you download content. More important for our digital creators or artists is the upstream capacity of internet connectivity. We'll talk a little bit more about that, but arts incubators certainly provide internet access if they have a physical facility. They often provide computers in those spaces. Sometimes the computers can be purchased due to funding that they provide. Sometimes they provided hotspots in some cases. For instance, SAC, which is an incubator that specializes in youth incubation in San Antonio, has been in business for a long time and does amazing work. During the pandemic, they provided hotspots to all of their participants, which is about 200 of them, who sometimes didn't have a computer, didn't have a smartphone, didn't have an ability to go to school, and certainly keep on creating. And of course, there is the digital skill training and the transferable skills that are associated with those digital skills that are targeted by these arts incubators. The theory that I based the chapter on is the social exclusion theory, is the idea that some folks income and underserved populations, and that's what we saw. A lot of arts incubators that we studied had a focus on serving low income and underserved creators. So that led to the importance of digital inclusion programs that they specialize. So we looked at 14 arts incubators. The data that we concentrated on was the American Community Survey, the FCC Broadband Speed Guide. The Speed Guide was not necessarily always the most accurate because that was provided through what different corporations that provide internet services disclaimed that the upstream and downstream capacity of their services were, whereas the Microsoft Urban Initiative weighed on those. And so we noticed that you never get 100% of whatever internet provider that you have says that they provide you. So what Microsoft was seeing was that sometimes it was just 30% or 40% of what we were paying for, or what you were hoping to get. We had some social, economic, and demographic data that we collected. So we were looking at perhaps folks from different backgrounds and how they did, perhaps younger folks who didn't have access to broadband, folks who didn't have access to smartphones, folks who didn't have access to any of the infrastructure needed to start accessing the digital space. And of course, I also we worked on inventorying the digital skills that were provided by each of these incubators. So we can, I want to kind of like show this now. Here, this is just a sample of one of the pages in the chapter. We can see the names of the incubators on the left-hand side. And within the incubator, sometimes they had only one program, so that truly was an incubator, right? They had multiple type of programs that they offered, and the type of disciplines, and then the type of technical or digital skills that were provided. Those are always hard skills. They didn't intend to be, we don't have any soft skills because in digital space, there's your hard skills and how transferable they were. So the skills that were being taught were also if the artists who were going to, they phase out of the creative sector into another sector, they could transfer these skills and all. All right. So we conducted about 15 hours of interviews with these incubators and learned a lot about the different strategies that they have, especially during through the COVID-19 pandemic and the type of work that they do. So I shared already some of some of the work that they were done, providing hotspots to youth in order for them to keep on studying. In the city of San Antonio, only like 30% of youths were able to continue attending school. That's just like the broad, how broad the digital divide was. Now, a lot of the time we think that rural markets have the toughest digital divide issues, but urban centers also have it. So, conclusion, the success of arts incubators in addressing digital divide issue and reducing social exclusion was documented in this chapter. There is an adaptation to the challenges posed by the pandemic and continues, we need to look at the continued support for artists. So from the time when we started studying those 14 arts incubators, 3 of them had some discontinued behavior. Sometimes it's financial, sometimes it's because they lost their physical space, not voluntarily. So there was like different, I don't say closure, I like the term discontinuity rather, because they need recoming right in a different form. So let me see. There's an ongoing need for digital skill training and infrastructure investment. For all of us who work in universities, we see this firsthand to bridge digital divide. But still, a lot of even our students in college struggle with digital divide. They may not have the devices. They may not have the access to the internet. Especially, I mostly teach online, and I teach in an online environment, and I see digital divide affecting even folks in college. So folks who don't, are not, are part of these incubators as an alternative, perhaps to attending higher education. The benefits that the arts incubators provide them is tremendous. There's also a lesson that can be learned from university programs, from arts incubation programs. There's an importance in gathering data and digital skill requirements and deficiencies. I think we all could listen to that. There is a need for effective skill development. We are seeing this more recently with AI upskilling that is needed. And there's a broader role of arts organization, educational institution, incubators, and advocacy group. There's still a lot of work that needs to be done by these organizations to reduce inequities in the arts, especially at the crossroad with digital divide. I have a couple of references that some of this work was done. The first one is the reference to the book chapter that this talk is based on. And sorry, and this is it. This is what I have for you today.
Wonderful. Thank you, Stan. Very good. So another plug to everyone. Make sure you put some questions as you've got them for the authors in the chat. We'll get around to all them, or stick around and ask them live in person. I want to hand this off now to Antonio and his team.
Thank you, Doug. We also would like to thank the NEA for supporting this, the lab, and making this opportunity possible. I first started this inquiry before I came to the University of Michigan. And when I got to the University of Michigan, I was excited to partner with my colleagues, Jason Imbesi and Matt Carruthers, on creating the study, and really being able to publish the second piece of the study of this work. And so I'm excited to share that with you all today. And so to give you an overview, Jason, if you could move us to the next slide, we're going to talk about the rationale for the study, the research questions, the theoretical framework, the methodology, findings, conclusions, and discussions. So Article 27 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights states, everyone has the right to freely participate in the cultural life of the community, to enjoy the arts, and to share in scientific advancement and its benefits, and everyone has the right to the protection of the moral and material interests resulting from any scientific, literary, or artistic production of which he is the author. This is from the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights in 1948. But this led us to think about how have cultural policies enabled, promoted, challenged, and or subverted the creative justice and cultural engagement of those historically and continuously oppressed. And then furthermore, for whom are cultural policies and whom should cultural policy studies center and why? Next slide, please. And so this led us to our big, broad research questions. As I stated earlier, this is a two-parter. So in the first study that is under review currently, we asked two research questions. First, to what extent have cultural policy scholars published on systemic oppression? So we were trying to get a sense of the breadth and depth. And then secondly, how frequently have cultural policy scholars published on systemic oppression? And so then we were trying to assess the frequency. But for the chapter, which is the second chapter in the book, we honed in on this question: what might a textual collocation analysis of colonialism, expansionism, and imperialism revealed about cultural policy scholars' understanding of oppression? And at the time, we had no idea that, the Gulf of Mexico would be changed to the Gulf of America, or, that the United States would be rolling back some of its commitments to its allies. So we kind of stumbled upon something that still is timely and relevant. Now, theoretically, we see our work in conversation scholarly with theater and pedagogy of the oppressed, the Freire and Boal texts, particularly because education in theater, or broadly the arts, can be used as liberatory mechanisms to enable cultural engagement and thereby creative justice. And so we were wanting to see what would happen if we were to look at cultural policies for who, and particularly cultural policy scholarship, who is being centered in the scholarship and thereby the policies, and what that might mean for broader cultural policies development.
Hi, everybody. I am just going to talk briefly as briefly as I can about the methodology, and I'm going to provide some context about our methodology, and then Matt's going to briefly discuss the findings of the second stage of our research, which is covered in our chapter. So to begin to answer our research questions, we conducted an emergent qualitative systematic content review of all issues of 3 major cultural policy journals: Cultural Trends, International Journal of Cultural Policy, and the Journal of Arts Management, Law, and Society. We selected these journals because they're highly and widely regarded amongst cultural policy scholars. And this is partly supported by the fact that each journal has a 2022 journal citation indicator that suggests they outperform other journals in their category in terms of average citations by at least 50%. So we developed a list of 58 concept terms encompassing 3 concept areas: forms of oppression, social identities, and practices, to use as the basis for developing our search terms. And you'll see here our sort of inventory of concept terms. From these 58 concept terms, we devised 109 initial search terms, which we use to conduct searches of the entire full text of each journal using the Taylor and Francis online platform between September and November of 2022. During our initial inquiry, which provides the foundation for the research presented in our chapter, we use truncation and wildcards to capture variations in terms. We use quoted phrases to help ensure search results included entire phrase rather than individual words within the phrase. We also develop variations of search terms for differentiations in spelling between American English and British English, as well as single word and hyphenated variations. We conducted recorded and verified initial search results for each term, and then we downloaded the results for each term as individual CSV files, which contain citation information for each journal article where we found at least one match for the search term. Search terms that didn't yield any results were separately recorded. We then concatenated and organized the results according to concept term and concept area. For the second stage of our research presented in our chapter, we focused on performing a deeper textual analysis of articles mentioning 3 related forms of oppression from our initial list: so colonialism, expansionism, and imperialism. We downloaded the full text PDF articles for all matches found for the 3 terms in the initial searches, so that we could use the embedded machine readable text as the corpus for the analysis. We used ANCOC version 4.2 to perform the textual analysis of the corpus. We delineated the articles into separate corpora for analysis by search term and journal, and then we performed term frequency and collocation analyses for each corpus. So several factors influenced our methodology and analysis. So first, it's important we acknowledge the fact that our social identities, as well as our disciplinary and technical expertise, shape the lenses through which we designed the study and interpreted the data. So researchers who hold different social identities, work in different fields, have different levels of expertise, may have designed a different study and analyzed the data differently. Technical limitations with the Taylor and Francis platform search functionality affected search results. So to provide one quick example, we found that their search algorithm ignores hyphens in search terms, even if the terms are in quotation marks. So in our initial searches, we performed quoted searches for multi-word terms that one can find either hyphenated or unhyphenated, such as low income or low dash income. In analyzing the results, however, we found exact duplicate results between the hyphenated and unhyphenated versions, so we excluded those duplications from our final data set. And at this stage of our work, we haven't performed rigorous checks for relevancy of each search term within the journal text due to the large number of overall results. Also, while we found the number of articles where a particular search term or concept appears, we haven't counted the instances that a given term appears within each individual article. In the second stage of our research, for this chapter. We didn't manually correct errors or inconsistencies present in the machine readable text extracted from the PDFs via OCR, which likely caused some misresults or generated some false positives. We also didn't remove text included in the PDFs that are not part of the articles, so such as like header or footer information. So it's likely there was some duplication of results there. And finally, of course, topics explored by scholars are often influenced by the professional or educational environment in which they work. An examination of one particular research topic might, of course, result in a proliferation, that's the word, of scholarly output, which examines a topic through different lenses and using different methodologies. And editorial boards and peer reviewers, of course, play a central role in shaping the landscape of published scholarship. Now I'll hand it over to Matt, who will present our findings. Matt.
Thanks, Jason. So just to start, I'll mention quickly that purely for the sake of time today, we won't be discussing all of the findings from our chapter, but just focusing on some of the major overall results that we found. You can find a lot more detailed layout of the findings and analysis that we performed in the chapter itself, so we highly encourage you to take a look at that. So this first slide here and the next one as well show the number of search results related to forms of oppression concept terms that we identified, organized by total number of results from fewest to most. So on this slide are roughly the first half of the search concepts for forms of oppression. And you can see that the results are pretty low across all three journals. Next slide, please. So this chart shows the most commonly occurring concept terms, so roughly the second half of the list. And as you can see within the forms of oppression's concept area, search terms pertaining to concept terms of racism, imperialism, and colonialism received the highest number of results, with expansionism receiving slightly fewer results, but still at a fairly high frequency overall. So it's difficult to pinpoint exactly why these forms of oppression have received significant attention over and above others that we had identified, though we can see from the data that there are some spikes in mentions that seem to correlate with specific historical events. So for example, there are spikes in occurrences in imperialism, colonialism, and expansionism around the time of the start in the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, for instance. So that period, 2003 to about 2005. Next slide, please. So we also wanted to mention the most frequent collocations with our concept terms, that meaning the terms that appeared most often in close proximity to our terms colonialism, expansionism, and imperialism within each article and each journal. So this analysis helps provide some insight into the context within which these forms of oppression were being discussed in the text themselves. So JAMLS, which is the oldest journal that we looked at, it began publishing in 1969, frequently had frequent collocations with our identified forms of oppression that were primarily geographical, so including British, American, and Canadian. Cultural Trends had frequent collocations that included displacements, Russian, Western, global, and logic. And IJCP had frequent collocations including settler, Japanese, identity, Canadian, Western, and American. So you can see here from the results that there is an apparent focus in discussing these forms of oppression in the Western world across all three journals. The one exception to that, with the prevalence of Japanese as a term, collocation term in IJCP, could potentially be attributed in part to a special issue that the journal ran in 2012, focusing specifically on cultural policy in Asia. So we're happy to discuss our findings in much more depth and detail in the Q&A, but for now, I'll pass it back to Antonio to talk about implications.
So, yeah, so we organize the conclusions and discussion section of the chapter around implications for practice, theory development, and research. And we'll be interested to hear from you all during the Q&A what you might think the implications of the findings are for practice, for theory development in arts, entrepreneurship, leadership, and cultural policy, but and also for research moving forward. And with that, thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. Let's open it up to some questions for either group of the authors, Stan or Jason, Matt, and Antonio. Are any? I haven't seen anything in the chat. No hands up. I guess I'll start with the first question until someone else raises their hand. So let's go back to Stan. You did a lot of this work in and around a pandemic, which posed some obviously some special circumstances, including ones of connectivity and internet access. If you were to project out into the future 5 years, which is probably irresponsible given how fast life seems to be moving nowadays, 5-10 years, where do you think all of that context of arts incubators stands? Where do you think we'll be?
I think arts incubators are very popular. They're like very interesting organizations. I think they're highly innovative. Some of them, struggle with. They tend to have a skeleton crew, so they tend to, perhaps not be as resilient at times, against economic, instability and so forth. So in that sense, at least the arts incubator ecosystem, I think is still going to be there. I see new ones popping up, and I see some, unfortunately closing. But in terms of digital divide and that sort of work, it'll have to do with perhaps infrastructure development on one end. So as we perhaps see fiber getting installed across parts of the country. However, fiber tends to, target high-end neighborhoods. Folks who have these corporations who want to make sure that they reach folks who can afford those connections. So that's still going to affect, I think, the ability of incubators to be able to provide that high-level internet connectivity. I think there will be more and more that move from physical to digital infrastructure. So moving from having a physical space and being asset rich and having that physical space to a digital space and giving up the physical space. It is cheaper to run a business that way. And sometimes if what you do is providing educational services and funding, which at times matters perhaps the most to the to aspiring artists that you're trying to catalyze, and so I think we're going to see more and more of that. We see this in the workforce in general, that remote work space that we're in. I'm not sure I'm answering the question.
No, that's good. That's good. That's perfect. Thank you. Okay, another question. I'm going to pop over to the other chapter. I could probably ask the same question, but you've tackled three. I think the journals you picked are great, right? They're spot on to cover some things, but to cover a heart of a literature. But two of the three are international, at least. I wonder how much the focus and your results reflect that aspect. And maybe the bigger question here is just to open up the floor for you to comment on essentially the differences, potential differences in an American context and perspective on a lot of these topics versus something you may see of different sensibilities in other contexts elsewhere on the globe. What do you think?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So one of the challenges is that colonialism and imperialism and expansionism are ongoing. And so the dissemination of ideas travel fairly quickly, especially with the advent of social media and the internet. And so I often kind of wonder like what really is localized or hyper local today when these ideas are rapidly traveling across oceans and multiple contexts, but also given that Australia, Canada, the UK, and the US, and Western Europe as a kind of like domineering presence in the idea of academic scholarship and who gets published and where they get published. All of those things factor into trying to like get at an understanding of what people in cultural policy has done. And I imagine that my colleagues have a more technical response because of their library expertise and
Well, I would jump in and just say it's good to keep in mind the scope, how scope can change throughout the years, and frequency of publication. So for a couple of these journals, for IJCP, they were originally European Journal of Cultural Policy and not international. And then JAMALS was Performing Arts Review. And their sort of titles change and their scope changed, right? So for those scopes can broaden or they can sort of narrow down depending on which way the journal sort of sees itself going. And then, of course, the content that we get back from our searches is affected by that, but also the frequency, because sometimes these journals are publishing 4 times a year, sometimes it's 5 times a year. It changes throughout time. So that's what we've seen in our results, and you'll see that in the chapter 2. I don't know if Matt has anything you would like to add.
Nothing much particular to add. I think you both covered it pretty well. I think one other thing to consider that's sort of tangentially related to this is just within this type of research in general, there's the question of just overall access to the materials to be able to do this research. So us being at a place like the University of Michigan with a very large library and a very well-resourced collections budget, we have access to the full runs of all of these journals. And other researchers at other institutions, may not have access to these same materials. So that research may be limited by those factors as well, especially with like international journals, things like that. But I would definitely be interested to see, what this research would look like 4 or 5 years from now, just considering that, or if there is any more of a difference between coverage or how these particular forms of oppression are discussed between American-based journals and international journals, just with the current political climate and things like that.
Yeah, thanks, Matt, Jason, Antonio. That reflects a lot of what I'm interested in. I'm glad you mentioned sort of the access piece too. And it's interesting for me, there's one thing to access it sort of as a reader, another one to be able to even access it as a producer, as an author to the research. So I edit the Journal of Cultural Economics, which is a very international journal, and it takes, I don't know, some sort of monumental feat to try to get a paper authored from Africa, anywhere outside of South Africa, to actually make it through our peer review process. We get so few submissions, and they're qualitatively different in terms of quantity and the resources. Clear that those authors are able to bring to bear with their work, and it's really hard. And then if I look at the submissions we get from Asia, they're generally, to the extent they're talking about these kinds of power relations, it's very different. There's not much coming in on racism, for instance, right? And so I think all of it in an international context is very interesting and possibly reflects a little bit, maybe it's a distorted lens of the society from which they're coming. And I think that's one thing I really liked about this chapter is it really raised some of those questions about to what extent do we reflect in this literature what is going on in society, and to what extent are we amplifying certain things or suppressing certain things, right? So it's all really interesting.
And also the like knowledge deficits that we suffer because we don't have access to that knowledge to advance humanity's understanding of like a cultural economics perspective from like Angola versus like a South Africa or a Ghana or a Bhutan even, right? And so I think we in our conclusions we talk about that like so I'm an associate editor for IJAM on practitioner perspectives, and it is laborious to try to work with practitioners who have a different kind of like thinking about the utility of research and why one does it and what it contributes to the discussion of practice. And it is a great deal of labor that is uncompensated, right? And so, but I have had to do some intentional work of like going out, identifying folks who not published with IJAM and like really supporting and coaching them through what might happen. And so I wonder if like the journals could provide some resources for editors to go into those parts of the world where they're not seeing contributions to the literature and support them in making those contributions.
Yeah, those are all great examples of sort of institutional, positive feedback loops, and just reinforcing the paths of least resistance are where we just keep reinforcing what it's always been like, and further cementing it rather than actually opening it up to wider possibilities and actual change. It is laborious in an uncompensated setting. It's a good way to put it. And you shouldn't expect to see it without some Herculean efforts or outside influence to support it. All right, I also want to welcome others to be raising their hands and asking questions of these authors. I want to try to turn it back over to Stan, see if he wants to jump in, possibly with a more comments on what you found with arts incubators and maybe how they differ from what you know about other incubators or those that are less specialized. I'm also curious in general, something I don't think we talk nearly enough about, maybe in life, about failure. And I think failure is something we don't like to talk about. It's sort of like death or something. It's sad, it's depressing, it's negative. And so we try to celebrate these successes, and we so much focus on the determinants of success and all this. We spend so little time talking about the determinants of failures and how to manage, how to learn from all of that. So there's another thread of incubating about those. Maybe incubation's a bad metaphor then about it's not failures, it's death there. But what are your thoughts on wherever that prompt is leading?
I'm glad you bring this up because actually I'm building an entire data set of discontinued organizations for the past 10 years. And of course, part of that, there is a subset of arts incubators in there. But it's the broad cultural sector, right? And so, right now, and probably for the past 10 years, at about, 500 organizations. But discontinuity is an interesting thing because, any organization can reincarnate, right? So they can either merge out. I'm seeing some arts incubators that are merging out. So they perhaps can't sustain where they are in a larger organization, which may not be even in the arts sector, but may acquire them. And they have the resources to keep their programs going. They look a little bit different, but that's usually one of the things that I've been seeing. You may see a reincarnation in the sense that perhaps the organization, had to fold, but now it's reincarnating under a different name and slightly different, incorporation and so forth. Also, arts incubators are not all nonprofits. Some of them are LLCs, some of them are state initiatives. Some of them are, organized by chambers of commerce and so forth. So we have different models out there, and it's very, very interesting. And perhaps, and certainly those who tend to be on the for-profit side of things, are going to generate income by through their real estate, right? So they're going to either work almost like a co-working space and perhaps that, meets the studio rental aspect of it and programming and so forth, and hope to like gather a lot of creative within one larger space, so you don't have to actually look outside of it. You have your entire network right there and then. So an organization that you can all look into that is very, very interesting, that is exactly that, is 21 Club. It's in Chicago. It's 2 stops down from over there. It's in the warehouse. There are probably like 2,000 creators in this, and including entertainment lawyers, and everything you can imagine. You don't need to go anywhere. You have everything you need in one place. So talking about an incubator, it's pretty awesome. Going back to the question you asked me earlier, one of the studies that I'm doing now for the Arts Incubation Lab is looking at youth incubators. And I think that's really the future of Arts Incubation, because they're looking at the pipeline, the feeding pipeline. And it starts really in middle school, high school, and otherwise, there won't be enough of population to feed those incubators, and then struggle. So it's but those youth incubators, there are about 80 of them around the country, and they're very, very interesting. It's all tricky because they're almost like at the intersection of an internship program, sometimes. And trying to get high schoolers to intern somewhere is a challenge at times. It's challenging enough to get college students to intern anywhere. So that's what I'm looking at, and I think probably the new, even though AI has been around for a long time, people don't think that, but it is a new frontier for creators. And I think that when we can look at the legal environment and see what that does. But that's probably the next development in the chapter.
Okay. Well, you actually just mentioned AI at the end, and I was trying to think, not seeing any other hands yet, about a connection between the 2 chapters. And I think, other than the thematic bits about implications for inequity and things, there's not a lot of overlap here. That's fine. But you both, I think there's an AI element to both that is very distinct. That there's this, what's it like for incubating or building human capital in a world where AI is invading more. But maybe because I've got a couple of librarian types in the room as well, I would not be surprised if peer-reviewed publications as we know it are gone, certainly in my lifetime, if not much, much sooner. And so I'm curious about where we think, for your respective sort of chapters, an AI, very AI activated world is going to be taking us. And so that's sort of going to be my last question for both groups, to see, and they'll go in 2 different directions, I'm sure. But what do you think? Who should we go with first? Let's go with Michigan first.
Well, I was waiting to see if Jason or Matt would, but I was literally just thinking about this question. And if AI learns from humans, and we have technology experts who are not wise enough to take out some of the ways that humans behave towards each other that perpetuate inequity and inequality and oppression and caste and othering, I just feel like it makes me more anti-AI, because like you literally have an opportunity to create another world and you just won't take this one thing out. And why? Like this one thing that leads to social divisions that actually I think another reason why we shouldn't have social divisions is because they're a threat to national security, right? If we have people internal to the country that will exploit them and people outside of the country that will exploit them, then let's just get rid of them. But that's kind of where I landed on the treadmill when I was thinking about AI and what this particular chapter, like some of the implications for it.
I like it. Matt?
Yeah, I can jump in here a little bit. So Yeah, I think there's the potential for AI to have a strong influence in like the publication space for better or for worse. So if you're, thinking about, peer review disappearing because basically AI takes over the editorial process, I would agree with Antonio in saying that, there's the myth of technological neutrality, but every technology is created by human beings. Those biases transfer over. So, especially because current AI is trained off of what already exists on the internet. And, editorial, any kind of editorial AI would be trained off of existing publications in any field. So, it would almost be expected that any AI doing editorial work would carry the same biases that are inherent in the publications that exist in the fields now. So it would bias submissions from areas of the world where they had published most often before, and be more likely to exclude submissions from other areas or things that hadn't been discussed in particular journals. Whether that omission is justified or not. There are some like other, I think, more technical uses for AI that could show some promise, but they're very, very limited. So one of the things in our particular study, for instance, is we're dealing with uncorrected optical character recognition, so uncorrected machine readable text, which more often affects older articles where, so like 1990s and before, where the original submissions were, paper and they had to be digitized. And then OCR AI has shown some limited success in being able to like recognize and rectify those types of things, which if you're doing corrected OCR manually, which is kind of the way it's been done in this research, it is an extremely time-consuming and laborious process. But yeah, I'm sort of the position that I always come back to this slide that IBM had in an internal management meeting, like back in the 1970s, that said a computer should never be entrusted with making a management decision because a computer can never be held accountable. So there is always the issue of accountability. If you put AI in any kind of decision-making space, be that editorial or anything else, where does the accountability lie? Ultimately when mistakes are made, and they will be made.
Well, thanks, Matt. Actually, looking at the time, I'm gonna call it here because I'm also seeing a couple of people have to check out. It's about 1 o'clock. I should have made it so we ended on a more positive note, but that's my bad for asking an AI question. I could have seen that coming. Thank you all. It's great to see. Thanks to our speakers, first of all. That's wonderful. Thanks to everyone else. It's great to see the familiar faces and or names in some cases. And here's my plug. Come back in 2 weeks. We have Andrew Zitzer and Tom Borup, who will be presenting on the topic of democracy as creative practice, weaving a culture of civic life. And so if you're at all curious about what civic life means in today's world, I'm sure we'll have a very vibrant discussion. So thank you all again, and I'll see you in a couple of weeks.
Hey, Doug, just a quick comment. OCR, 1964, 1965 World's Fair in New York City. IBM had a big place to go and visit, and they were starting to do OCR on. They had on the punch cards. You guys remember? Any of you remember punch cards? They had blocked off areas where you could write a letter in each of those blocks so that they could read it using OCR. Sorry.
We've come a long way.
It was just, yes, it was just a historical memory that I had of seeing that at the IBM Pavilion in New York City at the World's Fair in 64, 65.
Wow. That's great.
We've come a long way. You're complaining about the difficulties, but it's not that long ago when it had to be in a particular location, right. Big capital letters, etc. Sorry.
Yeah. No, there's a big, and it's like to this equity and access issue. Like they talk about being inaccessible back in the 60s. Like we've changed a lot. So
yeah. Absolutely.
Thanks, Neil. All right. Take care, everybody.